Sorry, Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to commend the AG and his team for what I thought was a brilliant presentation. And of course, I want to commend the police force and all the other associated entities in this ministry for the work they're doing. And I see that there's been an increase from last year of about $31 million, which tells me that the government is serious about the work that they're doing in this space. My specific question, however, pertains to forensic science. And it is my view that as a part of policing generally, but as a part of a country's tool kit, having adequate forensic technology and forensic skills, human resources, and other ways is critical to advancing our fight for justice in the country. So my question is in general, firstly, what are we doing specifically in this space as it relates to forensic science and its capacity to be able to solve a number of crimes that we have? And more specifically, I know that there's an increase in machinery and equipment from 500,000 to 1.3 million. And I'm just wondering what that machinery is and what it's for, and then generally where we're going in terms of forensic science.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and I will ask the Director of the Forensic Sciences Laboratory to assist me in the answer. But before I hand over to her, let me say a few things. There is no doubt that a fully functioning forensic sciences laboratory is an integral part of the investigation and can be an integral part of the prosecution of criminal offenses. There's hardly a crime scene in Barbados that does not see a significant amount of samples of one kind or another being taken by our scenes of crimes officers. When the Forensic Sciences Laboratory was set up 2 decades ago, it was clear in our mind that we needed to have a quick turnaround between the gathering of forensic samples and the delivery of the outcome of the various testing. For many years, we relied on overseas laboratories. Unfortunately, Honourable Member, that is exactly where we have come again. So that perhaps for the last 10 years or so, the Forensic Sciences Laboratory has been working at less than optimum. And for the last several years, it has not been functioning virtually at all. This situation is not satisfactory. Whenever DNA samples, and I think this is not a TV thing now, I think everybody who will watch TV, but also who will follow developments in law enforcement and so on, everybody would know that DNA is a critical tool in helping to determine culpability, and then those results are used to help to establish proof in the court. But our DNA samples have to be taken abroad by a police officer to a foreign laboratory to be tested. Now, I'm not making an issue of the chain of custody situation. That is simply what it is. But in this decade, and for the last few decades, Barbados ought not to have been at the mercy of foreign laboratories. Equally, toxicology, and I will leave the director to explain what toxicology is, but toxicology is frequently used in the course of an investigation to determine cause of death. We have a situation in the police service where a young man was found dead in a cell last year. And key to helping to determine his cause of death is toxicology results. But we've been in a situation where we have to send those results overseas. We've committed that this state of affairs at the Forensic Sciences Laboratory will be a thing of the past. And I believe that I can very safely commit to the government and to the people of Barbados that by June of this year, the forensics laboratory will be up and running. Up and running means a number of physical things that need to be done. Obviously, we're doing super sensitive testing, and therefore the quality of air in that building has to be optimum. The temperature sometimes have to be optimum. Perhaps even the amount of dust particles in the air might throw off a test. So we've been busy working on a number of physical things, eliminating leaks and so on, in order to be able to make sure that the laboratory is fit for purpose. The reason that we've not been working has been mold. That's it, mold. So we also have to make sure that the laboratory is perfectly clean and suitable for human occupation. We also have to invest in new equipment. So for example, Honourable Member, we're going to be purchasing, and I'm going to read the note I have, something called a rapid hit DNA system. As I understand it, our current DNA tests will take about 2 weeks, and I'll let the director elaborate. But now, anything called rapid hit, I suppose, should be fairly descriptive, and we'll be able to get those results back very quickly. We will now have we're buying new toxicology equipment, so we'll be able to do our own toxicology testing. A few years ago, I spoke to the laboratory in Trinidad and asked them if they could take a toxicology sample. They said, of course, AG will do it, and we sent it down by the police officer. 2 years later, the toxicology result has not come back. 2 years later. It is true that all of our laboratories are stressed, but we ought not to be having to be at the whim and fancy or at the mercy of other laboratories. So the reason for this increase is related to the cost of getting the laboratory set back up. As I said, we'll have it ready by June, and I'm confident that the laboratory will once more be able to play a pivotal role in our investigation and in our proof. Director, I hope I've not trespassed too much on your territory, but I'll hand over to you so that you can fill in all of the things that I've left out.
Yeah, it's on now. Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. AG, thank you, everybody. My name is Cheryl Corbin. I'm the Director of the Forensic Sciences Center. I don't need to elaborate all of our perils and trials and tribulations over the last few years. Everybody knows what that is. So it's better for me to speak to where we are now and how we're going to be moving forward. As the AG had said, we could not do a lot of work in the building because the environment was not appropriate for the scientific analyses, and one thing that I stood firm on is that I would not allow any of my scientists to work in areas that were compromised, because then it meant then that the accuracy and the confidence in the results that would have been got would not be satisfactory to the court, okay? So going forward now, there are pretty much 3 main areas that we have been not being able to service. The first one is toxicology. Now let me be very, very clear. Toxicology basically is the identification of any poisons or substances that would be averse to human beings. And the challenge is that it is not just toxicology on the living. The way how the investigation is done on post-mortem cases is totally different to how it is done on living samples. And post-mortem toxicology, the majority of forensic labs in this region do not do post-mortem toxicology, which is one of the challenges that we would have had in trying to get some of those samples overseas. However, we have already purchased and paid for the piece of equipment that's going to allow us to do post-mortem toxicology, and that should be landing anytime in April. So we can safely say that that service, which would be scientific support to any forensic pathology that is done on any bodies, we will be able to provide that service fairly quickly. Okay. The second thing in line is as it relates to cases involving gun crimes, cases involving narcotics. Most of our equipment or gas chromatographic machines with mass spectrometry and so on, most of them are at end of life because they're over 10 years old. Granted, the technology, even though, you know, they're still plodding along, but the technology which would have presented itself as updated software and mechanics and so on, we thought it best, if we're going to start out now, let us get the pieces of equipment that will last us for at least another good 5 to 8 years, so we don't have to stop and start all over again. So we have already purchased one GC, and the other one, we're hoping to have that done this financial year as well too. AG and PS know how to deal with that part. And once those come in, then again, we will be able to give the support to the police service as it relates to the narcotics cases. I just want to say here is that even though everyone thinks that we were not working at all, that in a sense is not really very true, because the chemistry department, the chemistry section, we refurbished an area on a level in the building that was not compromised, and they were able, over all this time, to continue providing the service to the Barbados Police Service as it relates to their narcotics cases, and in some instances, those cases that involved firearms, to be checking for the firearm discharge residue and so on. That basically allowed to not have any backlog in the narcotics cases. And as far as I am aware right now, all cases that have been submitted for suspected narcotics are up to date. They've all been analyzed. So now moving on to the aspect of DNA. But before I say that, the reason that one of the advantages of chemistry being able to work is that we were still able to one of our clients that we had 4 years, which is Dominica. They submitted quite a number of cases to us over the past few weeks, and this is going to give us substantial amount of revenue as soon as the financial year opens. So even though we're down, we're still not totally out. Now, as it relates to DNA, this has always been a challenge, but the 10 years or however long it is that we have been off, we have now been able to catch up with technology. This new piece of equipment that we're getting, which is called a Rapid Hit ID DNA system, it is an exceptionally rapid DNA platform, and it generates all of the lab quality forensic DNA profiles that we need. In addition to that, it can do an analysis for what is referred to as single source DNA, meaning a sample coming from one person as opposed to a mixed sample, and it can generate a result in as little as 90 minutes. Now, the advantage of that is that you're now able to put a profile into an international database. Like, for instance, the FBI has CODIS, which is Combined DNA Index System, which is a platform that allows international agencies to, with the necessary multilateral agreements, to share these profiles with the FBI and other agencies. And what this allows is that it allows for the assistance of criminal investigations across borders, okay? Now, what I want to let everyone know at this point in time, when we get that DNA system here and we can generate those profiles quickly, we do have forensic legislation on the books already. The Forensics Procedures and DNA Identification Act, which is CAP 121B, and Part 10, Section 66, indicates that we have the ability to create our own local databases and indexes from convicted offenders and arrestees. The provision is there. What I will give as an assurance to the room today is that we will work very closely with the legislators and the experts within the Office of the Attorney General to ensure that we do not step out of line as it relates to the holding of that information, and to ensure that the legislation can really support us creating these databases that will be able to be used for the police's benefit. It will not only be for criminal cases, but also for missing persons. And that's where we are right now, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, AG, and thank you very much to the team. My second question is in relation to subprogram 3243, payment of claims made against the Crown. Now, you know, many people lament that when there is an incident that involves government having to pay, it can take a while. And I see here we've allocated $1 million for the payment of claims made against the Crown. I would just like to know, on behalf of Barbadians, what are we doing to be able to expedite this process, if indeed we are doing anything to expedite the process, and what comfort they can take in the fact that we have a government that has allocated these funds and the extent to which they will be able to access these funds within a respectable time.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The first thing I'd like to remind the Chamber of is that the amount that is allocated for claims against the Crown, and if you check historically, you will find that that amount is always set at $1 million. So it is, you will never in any estimate see any variance in that figure from one year to the next. The reason for that is that the relationship that the ministry has with the Ministry of Finance, as long as that amount is depleted, it is topped back up by the Ministry of Finance, simply because we take our obligations in relation to claims against the Crown seriously. Second point I want to make is that when we say claims against the Crown, these are claims in the nature of litigation, even though litigation may not have been commenced. I make the distinction, in other words, between a claim for monies due on a building contract. A contractor who is building a building for government and sends in a certificate for $300,000, that's a claim against the Crown too. But that is not one that will be covered under this head unless a dispute ensued and litigation was likely. Delays in this system, let me tell you that Chambers has just under 20 attorneys at law. Chambers is divided into 3 sections: advisory, contracts, and litigation. Chambers is the lawyer for the public service of Barbados. While it is true that some departments will have their own attorneys, such as the Ministry of Public Works, they have 2 lawyers. National Housing has about 4 or 5. Who else comes to mind? But there are several. Ministry of Public Service, they have 2. So you will find that there are lawyers scattered all across the public service who, in a limited way, deal with questions related to claims. But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, the quantum, the liability, those matters generally make their way to Chambers. In fact, we have an anachronistic arrangement where the Ministry of Public Works is able to look at, because people have claims against the Ministry of Public Works all the time. They car drop in a place where a manhole used to be, but somebody moved the manhole and then put up the sign, and they burst the car tires or something. So those are claims that will go to Public Works. But as long as the claim exceeds $2,500, it has to get bumped up to SG's office. Never mind that the lawyers, they're all lawyers, but those claims get bumped up to SG's office. The bottom line, therefore, is that the Solicitor General's office has limited manpower to deal with the large volumes of claims, and it therefore means that we have fewer bodies to throw at these claims than we would like. Claims are also delayed because we don't get the cooperation we need from the claimants. The Solicitor General, who is here, will be able to tell you about numerous matters that are awaiting discussion with Council. In fact, I can tell you that from time to time I get involved in some of the more complex matters. There is one matter in particular that I can think of that I have been WhatsApping the attorney for the last 2 years. For 2 years, asking her, please, can we sit down and have a discussion on this matter? Please, please, please. And this is a matter that dates back to before I was first Attorney General in 2016. In fact, to be fair, the matter I'm thinking of was started, I believe Sir David Simmons might have been the Attorney General when it commenced. And we are now so far past, and despite my WhatsApp messages to say to the lawyer, I am going to send this file back across the chambers, I can't get a response. So yes, there are delays, but the delays are not solely on our side. There are other reasons for delays. Sometimes we need information from other departments. Information such as what is the extent of NAS benefits that an individual is receiving. We have no way of taking it ourselves. We have to communicate with that department and ask them, and then wait for them to send the information. So there are a large number of variables which can affect the amount of time it will take to settle a claim. I wish I could say to you that we are in a position to settle all claims within 1 year or within 2 years, but there are some harsh realities that we have to face. Some of those realities relate to the availability of medical reports. Sometimes claimants can't pay for medical reports. There are times when we have to say, well, we wanted to get an independent medical report, as we've had to do recently. So there are a number of variables. I would like to see a situation where we move through these things a lot faster. But when people start claiming $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, then that is a different order of negotiation, and we have to make sure that we are very prudent when it comes to how we negotiate and settle government's legal obligations. There are also some obligations that have to await the outcome of court cases, so that until the court case is determined, there's nothing that we can do, and those are also paid under this head. Is it a desirable situation? No. We certainly could use more staff, but I think that before we get to that point, there are a number of rationalization things that we're looking to do, including bringing all of the lawyers in government under the Office of the Attorney General and under the supervision directly of the Solicitor General. We've tried to make sure and do a lot of training with our lawyers. We've done in-house training. We've had experienced attorneys at law in the private bar come in to do training on elements of it. I have also got involved in some of it myself. But we remain open to finding ways and means of improving the process. But the challenges are not just on our side, they're also on the other side of the fence in terms of the claimants. With that, though, let me mention a matter that received public attention only in the last few days. I think it was yesterday's paper, Mr. Chairman, and it had to do with attorneys at law complaining about the fact that cases were being settled by bonds. This is not news in the sense that it has been the policy of the government since we entered the MF program that any matter dating back, any matter that has its origin prior to 2018 would be settled in bonds. Those bond issues were 18 months. We passed a piece of legislation somewhat late, I think it was around 2021 or 2020, and that legislation said, when? 2021, and that legislation said the same thing, but this time we're settling it by Series J bonds, which are payable over a 42-month period. Let me explain this. Government, like any other enterprise, has to manage its cash flow. Plain and simple. When somebody submits a claim and it is settled for $1 or $2 million, government has to manage its cash flow. The government, both in the IMF program and as a result of dealing with how we manage our cash flow, made a simple decision. We could either wait until we have the cash to pay you your settlement, or when once the settlement is reached, we can pay you in installments. Now I have I'm almost embarrassed to say, 35 years, going on 36, experience at the bar. In all of my career, I have never said to a client that they should hold out for cash when getting installments is an option. Because you never know when the individual will have that full quantity of cash to pay you. Plain and simple. So if installments is an option, then take the installments, because at least there's money coming in. Government's cash flow has to be split between salaries, between contracts, between a whole variety of things. And as an act of prudence, a decision was taken that this is how we're going to settle claims. It is open to the individuals to say, I don't want any installments. That's fine. You can say that. You can say that. But it then means that you would have to wait until the government is in a position to be able to take up X dollars in cash to settle your claim in full. Now, to my mind, it was a reasonable step to take. It certainly was a better approach than the one under the last administration, which saw well over $1 billion in debts due to Barbadians that simply were not being paid. So our stance was, let us pay you in installments rather than wait until we find the cash to be able to pay you all at once. I hope that that answer has been helpful.
Thank you very much, AG. Yes, it does. It answers the question very clearly. My final question is in relation to the CPC's office. Now, we come to this place every Tuesday, sometimes Tuesdays and Fridays, and I think it is fair to say that perhaps we've passed the most legislation in any period for any government. And when I look at what is coming down the pipeline, I anticipate that this is going to continue for some time. I personally am very thankful. While I was Minister of Blue Economy, we were able to pass some very specific legislation. I see some still coming from the Ministry of Tourism as well as the Ministry of Environment related to what we did there. And of course, as Minister responsible for people empowerment, we've just passed a few very serious pieces of legislation. And we have two more. I think one should be laid next week as well. I say all this to say that the CPC's office is obviously working extremely hard, but I wonder if there's a question there on capacity and what we're going to be able to do to expand it, because the work that has been produced is of the finest quality. I personally want to thank the CPC myself, because I know she's been responding excellently to the work that we've done. But I just wonder what the plans are, because I throughout the public service, we've been asking our public servants in some cases to go above and beyond, and the CPC's office clearly has done a lot of work. So I'm just wondering if there's any plans there to strengthen that particular department, and considering what we have done and what it is that we are about to do.
Let me join you by thanking CPC's office as well. I guess the person who sits in the AGC get the cursing and the credit all in equal measure. So I get the cursing, and then I also get the credit for passing a lot of legislation. But the truth is, the Chief Parliamentary Council's office, headed by this current chief, have been real soldiers in this exercise. I've had the benefit of working with two different chief parliamentary council since we came to government in 2018. The first one retired, and the current one, the current chief took up office a few years ago. Well, no, sorry, this is the third one. Sorry, the third one. So two have retired, and this current one is now in office for, I think, the last 2 years. They have all three of them worked above and beyond to meet the government's requirements. I have to tell you that you all are my colleagues, but you annoy me greatly. You annoy me greatly. Then you call and say, man, you can't get this due quick. We want this by Friday. And sometimes you fail to recognize that the drafting legislation, if it was so easy, you all could do it. You are requiring sometimes individuals who frightened for seawater to draft 2,000 pages of laws dealing with the blue economy. You're asking individuals who don't know how to plant a piece of cuscus grass to draft the most complex legislation on agriculture. What they do before they draft legislation, they actually have to become immersed and almost as expert as you are before they can even begin to grapple with the issues. Yes, they confer with your staff, but some of the things that you present are not exactly easy to deal with. We've had to recognize, though, that there's only so much that our few bodies can achieve. The Chief Parliamentary Council wants to expand. I will let her speak about that. But let me be very frank with the chamber. We have had to go outside of Barbados to get assistance from foreign drafters. We've had to contract foreign drafters to do drafting. We've also had to contract retired Chief Parliamentary Counsel, former Justice of Appeal. I'm not going to call his name, but we've had to contract him to help us with drafting as well. But in his case, it is actually dual purpose because he's not only able to draft, but he's able to help to mentor a new generation of drafters. Drafting shortage or the shortage of draftsmen is not a Barbados thing either. When we came to government in 2018, I had a meeting with the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and I said to her, Madam General Secretary General, wanted to request, Baroness Scotland, wanted to request that Barbados wants to make of you is drafters, legal drafters. As you said, AG, if I could give you, I'd be happy because it would mean that we would have surplus elsewhere. She said to me that there is a shortage, there's a dearth of draftspersons across the region. 2 years ago, when we were faced with the need to draft some complex maritime legislation through the Office of the Clerk of Parliament, we reached out to the UK Parliament and to Canadian Parliament and said to them, do you have any people who might be available to do contract work on drafting for us? And happily we found some individuals, and therefore we've been able to get some drafting done outside of Barbados, but it has, of course, to conform with our norms. We're working on draft pharmaceutical development legislation, and for that, we're having to relate to draftspeople from Rwanda. But we've had instances where people that we've worked with formulate language in a way that is completely alien to ours. And we try to say to them, you know, we can't pass this as a law. Sounds perfectly all right to you, but that's just not our idiom. That's not how we do it. So they labor mightily. It is hard work. But without them, this chamber and many of our efforts could not function. Let me warn that we are looking to see how we could devolve the drafting of smaller instruments onto ministries, because it's taken up a lot of their time. So notices under the Tourism Development, areas under the Tourism Development Act, things that are a paragraph long, that are formatted and follow a particular norm. We don't really think that we need or draft people to do it. Resolutions for Parliament, land resolutions, housing resolutions. Many of these are things that can be done in-house and then sent up to Parliament or other places for action. But those are steps that we hope to take in the coming year to ease some of the burden so that we will leave them available to do the work that they need to do and that is of such great value to the chambers. I'm going to hand over to the Chief Parliamentary Counsel so that she can supplement what I've said.
Thank you, Honourable AG. Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Sean Rainbell. I am the Chief Parliamentary Counsel acting. Just to give a... Okay, thank you. Yeah, just to give some insight into the efforts made by the office to increase our numbers so that we can facilitate the drafting of legislation in a more efficient manner. A proposal was prepared for the Ministry of the Public Service to set about the appointment, facilitating the appointment of 4 additional officers. These officers would be differing in rank, so more often than not, you would need officers to do the rank and file work, and then officers who would have more experience dealing with more complex matters. So in all, it would be 4, and I have been assured that more will come in the appropriate time. We also have put forward proposals for the strengthening of our support staff. This is in relation to the drafting, the legislative drafting assistants who not only do day-to-day typing for the drafting office, but many of them are equipped with paralegal type qualifications, and that assists officers in a lot of the research that is required, and then also with proofreading of matters. So we have been making slow progress in trying to increase the number of the office, but at the moment, in terms of our present complement, I think that we have been performing mightily, and I thank you all for your support in assisting us in getting the work done. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael South. Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just want to respond to the Honourable Member of the Opposition because it seemed to be besotted with the ministerial project. And it is interesting that on this island, he's the only person who seemed to have a difficulty with the ministerial projects. We have not had at the ministry a single complaint from community clubs, individuals about the ministerial project. And at the very basic level, and I'll speak about St. John, we have issues with some animals, some cows and stuff that are running on the field. So what we're trying to do is to protect that. They're also rodents, so we are rat-proofing the facility at Gore Hill. Mr. Speaker, Chairman, sorry. The Honourable Member also referred this morning about seeing 7-year-olds walking. And I'm happy that he's using a youth lens, because I'm using a youth lens too, sir. And I want to say to you that on the 23rd of January this year, I saw some young people walking as well, walking at a graduation put on by Project Dawn. And I would encourage you to go on YouTube and plug in the graduation for Project Dawn to see if you are seeing anyone from Paradise Village, Scarborough, Carter's Gap, St. Lawrence, or Pegwell at that graduation, because I saw youngsters walking, Honorable Member. My question to the Attorney General and his team that are doing such a fantastic job. I see in the estimates there was mention of change agents. Can you speak to what exactly are the change agents within the ministry?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Through you, Mr. Chair. Change agents within the communities identified to the National Crime Prevention Program early by the Barbados Police Service through their stats department. They would have identified for us in the very early stages of the programs particular communities that were specifically at risk. And what the program has sought to do and has done is to recruit persons from within those communities who have a level of respect in the community, those who would have turned their life around in the community. And the change agent is those persons who would engage with those specific community to specifically bring out the at-risk youth, hard-to-reach youth, and in some cases, those seen as impossible to reach youth. We talked a lot about the parent programs earlier, so they would have interacted with a number of the parents. They have interacted with the community, the blocks, and so on. They've started some adventure clubs, and the adventure clubs is really a direct response to the blocks. A lot of our young people would tell you that they don't have anything to do or anything exciting to do, and therefore a lot of them get into a lot of mischief. As you would appreciate, idle hands are the devil's play shop, and therefore the adventure clubs are supervised, set up, and facilitated by these change agents. And the final thing I'll say on that is the change agents have been mandated to work with all the existing systems to bring a level of collaboration and complement what is being done already through the community policing, the youth commissioners, community development officers, and other people working in the community. But that in a nutshell, Honourable Member, is what a change agent is.
Thank you. I also need some information about the mediation department. I think that is something that is bearing some fruits. Can you expand, please?
You say what department?
The mediation department.
Mediation, okay. So you would have heard mentioned when we talked about conflict resolution, violence reduction, retaliation, mediation, and mitigation. That is under our violence reduction pillar. And it's not a department per se, but this is one of the responsibilities of ILS. And again, working closely with our partners in the Barbados Police Service, and also persons of the general public will reach out to us. There are very specific cases that come to mind where you have persons who would be in fights with one another. In one case, I remember what the police would term seriously bodily harm, although it may have been reported or not reported. But what will happen is you will have parents reaching out and say, come and get these children before they kill one another. What the ILS would do is they would go out and actually work with each side until they bring them together. Now, some people may gather over a cup of tea, some will gather over a bowl of soup, but they actually have a mechanism which is called from war to the barbecue grill, where they actually work with persons who want to retaliate against one another, and work with them to a point where they go up and do a barbecue and eat and break bread together. As the Attorney General said in his opening, there were 23 such interventions, 24 such interventions. 15 of those have been resolved so far. So ILS actually goes out when people are at war with each other, in conflict with each other, even sometimes having to go to the hospital or the clinic and start communication and mediation with people before they get to the stage where they want to retaliate or, in simple terms, kill each other. And that's what the mediation program is under the ILS program.
Thank you, Minister. My final question is in relation to the crime prevention program. Are there any setbacks, any issues as it relates to that particular program? Because I know that there's a overlap in terms of how our ministries treat to crime prevention.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I would like to start by saying and thanking you for your partnership. In terms of the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment, as you will know, we've had a lot of joint meetings together because our mandates are similar, where you work with young people 9 to 29 within your mandate, and those captured in our mandate, high risk, at risk, and young persons at the primary, secondary, and tertiary risk levels, not school level, at the risk levels. We've had occasion to meet together to work with the various programs and so on. Where we have similarities, we collaborate and join forces, make sure that we collaborate so we don't duplicate the use of taxpayers' money. But if I had to point to a setback, I would say it is really we have a competitive disadvantage in a number of ways. I said this before, and I use this opportunity to say it in the House, that when a set of gun-toting criminals or vagabonds or persons want to get up and commit crime, they get up and commit crime. Obviously, because of accountability, transparency, and accountability, in order to match their programs, we have to go through a pretty long and stringent process. Committees, we have to do cabinet papers, National Security Council, and so on. So we had a time disadvantage with the criminals. Criminals just get up and go. But obviously, when you're working in a system like this, you want to have that flexibility. So we're looking at ways to maintain the accountability, but still to be agile to respond to the nature of crime, which is very, very agile. The second one, and I'll probably just do two, is comparative or competitive disadvantage in terms of narrative. And the reason I say that is because some people say thought is cheap. But when we seek to politicize crime, what actually happens is you actually strike at the heart of sometimes the effectiveness of the programs. So for instance, it is very easy to see crime. It is very difficult to see crime prevention. So the 13 violence interruptions will not make the front page of the paper, but the one that doesn't go through will make the front of the paper easily. So that is one. Two, crime is always a sexy topic, not just in Barbados, but around the world. I think you would have heard before, if it bleeds, it leads. So when you have persons committing violence or crime, it is easy for the narrative to get behind that. But a parent program, an 11-page feature, a community pop-up, cook-off, these different things are very hard to get out there. So that's really been one of the setbacks. And again, it strikes at the morale of the project unit, the change agents, sometimes even myself, to have to battle more, spend a lot of time, fighting the narrative as opposed to fighting crime, as I thought, in my one naive way when I started, that we would have all come together and work together for a common purpose. So Honourable Member, to answer your question directly, I think that is one that really has struck at a setback within the program. Even in terms of organizations, people who wanted to come on board, work with the program, provide assistance. Sometimes the thought that we feel is cheap becomes very, very expensive when people pull back. So those are the two main things I believe have been setbacks for us in terms of trying to battle agility and battle the narrative. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, that is my 3. I yield back.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. John. Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are, I believe, more related to the National Peace Program, to the Minister with responsibility for that program. In your lead-up, you spoke about the successes of the program, National Crime Prevention Program. So my first question is, what are the rubric or the criteria that you use to determine or to measure success of your programs?
All right, thank you very much. Great question. We spoke about progress and not success. I just want to make that clear. Again, people may think it's language or semantics, but these distinctions are extremely important because particularly when you're dealing with tertiary crime prevention, again, that is rehabilitation, you have people who may backslide into crime and different things like that. When you're dealing with the tertiary risk level persons, that persons involved in crime, you may have that same phenomenon occurring. So what we look at in terms of progress is in quantity and quality. I would say for the overall program, because we are still in the nascent, in the new stage of it, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit has been tasked to do evaluations of the various programs, and that evaluation is ongoing. But for the green shoots that we would have seen thus far, that we have seen so far, we'll look at, for instance, with the Flip the Script program. As you said, we have just over 160 young people involved. And what we look at is the number of those young people keeping on the straight and narrow path. We see that as success. In terms of the parental programs, you would appreciate that in some cases, in most cases, you would need time to see the various progress of those programs or what you determine as success. There are pre-parents in the program. Therefore, you would appreciate, you would need at least 15 years to see any success in that program. There are parents of toddlers and so on. So the rubric that we use is really looking at the number of people we get into the program and then if the objectives of the programs are met. The overall goal of the National Crime Prevention Program was to look at how do we reduce serious major crime homicides along with our partners in this office and others. And you will have seen in 2023, working with the partners, you see a dip, you see things go back up. And then, so those are numerical, quantifiable statistics that you can look at. But our main thing is looking at how many persons we are able to target and how many of them we can keep from crime, hence the term crime prevention.
Certainly in Barbados, in the urban spaces especially, where we would consider them to be hotspots. But over the past few years, we have seen some areas in the rural Barbados beginning to warm up. And what I would like to know is how do you go about targeting certain areas for intervention in your program, and what are some of the strategies going forward that you would employ to perhaps arrest these areas, these communities, not necessarily persons, but the decay or the cancer that's beginning to form in certain communities when people move around and resettle before that cancer spreads, and those areas then become hotspots. What are some of the strategies you're using to target those areas, to get to those people, those young people especially, before they are influenced by the criminal element?
Thank you again, Honourable Member. So we use two different methods depending on the type of programs. There are universal methods that we have, and we also have targeted methods. So in terms of the data-driven, evidence-based method, we use the geospatial map of crime provided by the Barbados Police Service. We use the BCO, which is the Barbados Crime Observatory, and we use research coming out of the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. So for our overall universal programs, we acknowledge that Barbados is not urban Barbados and rural Barbados, but it is the Republic of Barbados. Said in this chamber before, Barbados is too small for us to say, let's focus on one particular part of Barbados. Everywhere in Barbados is about a bus ride away, about half hour away. A bus can travel, a gun can travel, and ammunition can travel in less than half an hour to any part in Barbados, about. So therefore, that is why we have universal programs. Looking at the data that we have and suggesting where crime is, and I will talk about the geospatial map. So the Barbados Police Service provides us with a geospatial map of serious and major crime, and we reverse engineer that map. That map is telling us where crime is occurring. What is important is where the crime is coming from. Where the crime is occurring would be good information for the police, for their patrolling, predictive policing, etc., etc. But where the interventions are most needed, and these would be the targeted interventions now, would really be where the crime is coming from. One of the things that I can alert the House is that the fact that back in 2016, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit did research of violence in the schools. One of the interesting things coming out of that study is there is a direct correlation, and I think if we go deeper, there would be a direct causation of the top 6 vulnerable schools with the zones and the feeder zones of those schools. So in other words, the same information provided to us by the Barbados Police Service trace back to the zones feeding the top 6 vulnerable schools in Barbados. So that is the sort of thing that we use to target the programs, the schools, the communities, the age groups that we target. Highlighted by Criminal Justice Unit recently, you've seen that we've had a drop in the average persons being held and charged for murder. We're looking at between 16 and 18. So you will see a lot of focus going in there at the tertiary level, risk group, for that particular age group, and going younger because you can't wait till they get 16. If you're 16 and picking up a gun, the intervention must not start at 16. Remember that just 5 years ago, these would have been sitting down in a hall somewhere, graduating, hair comb or plaque, uniform, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, getting ready for the world, and then something happens within that 5 years. And it is the responsibility of not just the Office of the Attorney General, but the Ministry of Youth, People Empowerment, Education, and so on, to continue to work throughout these age ranges to ensure that we keep them on the straight and narrow path. But to answer your question, we are certain that we are covering all areas. Remember in Chamber last year in this same exercise, there were a number of colleagues who operate from the north of the country that were adamant in representing their constituents to ensure that they want programs too. And the National Peace Program under the National Crime Prevention Program have delivered programs from St. Lucie to St. Philip. But there have also been a scientific and evidence-based way that we've gone on to do additional programs in a targeted way using the Barbados Crime Observatory, the Barbados Police Service Crime Stats Office, and the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit.
Thank you. My final question, you made mention about the allocation of funds. Can you speak and maybe perhaps elaborate more on the allocation of funds to various groups and how the use of those funds impact the program?
Thank you very much again, Honourable Member. So we spoke about the phases within the program. I didn't get to elaborate on them. I'll go through them quickly and then I'll match it with how the funds are allocated. Phase 1 of the program was reducing the heat on the street, and that's why the violence reduction pillar was the first out of the blocks. We had to get control of what is happening. Phase 2 is situational crime prevention, and that is working with colleagues in here to ensure that we have the requisite debushing, patrolling, CCTV, etc., making sure the situation for criminals are very difficult. Phase 3 is where we want to spend the bulk of time and bulk of attention and bulk of funding is preventing people from becoming criminals in the first place. In phase 3, there are 5 sections, and to make them easy to remember, I say them like this: entertain, brain, train, sustain, and maintain. And I maintain that these are not just rhymes. These are a very strategic way of addressing the issue. So in entertain, you will see that we have a number of entertaining things. That is why we talked about being young and you want to travel fast and you want to do risky things and you want to be involved with the horses and the bikes and these different things. That is the entertain. But the mission, the motive is really to get the captive audience of these young people to come forward. And then we do the brain. And the brain is really like the flip the strips, the flip the script, the higher heights and so on, where you're trying to get the mindset change of these young people. Now, most social ills have said, unless you attack the mindset, you are going nowhere. And this relates to poverty, crime, drug abuse, anything. If you don't shift mindset, you are really wasting money, spending money, and not investing money wisely. The training part, we've had a number of training programs, and these training programs is really to tool or retool, equip our young people so that they could get ready for the next part, which is sustain, where they can go now and have a better chance at getting a job, a career, a business, so that they can sustain themselves. Now, we stopped there at first, but common sense dictated that we needed the 5th and final part, which is maintain. Because after we entertain and bring you in, after we do the mindset change, after we do the training and sustain, we needed to make sure that there's something there to maintain you. And that is where the service groups come in. That is where the faith base comes in, because then you are now within a community of role models who can maintain you on the straight and narrow path. And that is how we determine the type of programs that we engage in. So, as I said before, we don't do sports for sports' sake. We don't compete with the National Sports Council, nor the Ministry of Sports. We work in collaboration with them, of very specific targeted programs. And as I could tell you, we have the Future Tridents program, which is a program with the Barbados Football Association, targeting these same vulnerable communities, something called Future Tridents, where over 140 young people are engaged on a weekly basis. We work with the wrestling, hockey, boxing. We've done table tennis as well. We have the Safari Jamboree, which is where we work specifically with at-risk youth, boys and girls, in terms of learning etiquette and different things. And the list really, really goes on and on and on. We elevate the piece, we did barbering, bartending, all these various things to make sure that these young persons are engaged. And that is how then we've come up with the numbers that you will see in the operating expenses, looking at the Live Wise campaign, the empowerment campaign, the parental campaign, the intervention campaign, and the mass-based training, all of which would then match the entertain, brain, train, sustain, and maintain model. And that is how we allocate the funds, and Honourable Member.
And thank you. And I just want to encourage you to keep up the good work. Those of us who engage with persons at the street level can see the impact firsthand of these programs on the mindset of our youth. And I would wish that this would continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member of Christchurch South.
Thank you very much, sir. It would be, the public would wonder at this exercise, which I term one of self-congratulation and a large disconnect from the reality that exists in this society. If a government is heard in here congratulating itself and thumping tables about programs to deal with the prevention of crime, where we've had 50 murders last year and 8 so far this year, the public is now entitled to believe that this government is entirely disconnected from the reality that exists in this country. And that is how I presage my question. I mean, what's going on? Are we saying that these programs are successful? I've heard the last member, or rather the last spokesman on behalf of the government, caution the member questioning him that he was using the word progress and not success. And one would therefore want to encourage the government to take this exercise seriously if it intends to give some reasonable explanation to the country. For the state of crime, this is no age in which we can thump tables and self-congratulate when between January the 1st, 2024 and the present, 58 people have died through violent and murderous crime. And when we left this place before lunch, the learned Attorney General added some figures and told this Parliament, by the addition of those figures, and sometimes we are wrong, even I am wrong sometimes by my own admission, that $1,050,000 was paid, and I did not deal with numbers then, it was introduced by the learned Attorney General, that $1,050,000 were paid by way of grants to nonprofit organizations, and the learned Attorney General named those organizations. But like the dissonance between self-congratulation and reality, there is a dissonance between what the learned Attorney General disclosed in the sum of $1,050,000 and the sum of $900,000 disclosed by the official document. I'm prepared to be wrong, but it means that $150,000 has not been accounted for. What I want this learned Attorney General to account for now is a promise made late last year while there was a raging discussion about violent crime. And I am entitled to use my terms, and I describe what happened in the aftermath of that discussion as a diversion in a national discussion as to violent and murderous crime. The government somehow related tint on car windows to violent and murderous crime and told the people of this country that they were going to pass what we term colloquially tint legislation. I'm entitled to tell this country and this Parliament that on every occasion I have come to this Parliament since then, certainly including all of the sit-ins of this year, I was promised that that tint legislation would have come to the Parliament. Maybe we've had 3-4 sit-ins, excluding today's, and that promised tint legislation has not come. It is my view that, having heard what we heard this morning, that persons who are known to be involved in crime are now the beneficiaries of government's official policy that lick and lock up done with. And that was the utterance of a senior minister in this place. That persons involved and known to be involved in crime are the beneficiaries of some principle that lick and lock up done with, and they can now expect to benefit not from financial assistance, but we've heard that there's some distinction between financial assistance and financial empowerment. So, while they benefit from financial empowerment, and the drivers of over 100,000 vehicles in this country that may have tint nervously await their penalization and perhaps even criminalization, but let us stay with penalization for the time being. While they await the sword of Damocles, the governmental sword of Damocles, that is about to fall on the heads of innocent people, including young women who drive home at night behind tinted windows so that they would not be seen by those men who are involved in robbery and murder. I want to ask this Attorney General, and I'm not going to use the emotive language as to when the sword of Damocles in relation to tint will swing, but when will that legislation dealing with tint come to this Parliament? I'm obliged.
The honourable member asked one question, but his precatory remarks, Mr. Chair, do move me to make a few comments before I get to the question of when the tint legislation will come. I'm happy that he's so excited that it is another item in the arsenal of law enforcement, but we'll come to that in a moment. First of all, the honourable member once again demonstrates that he does not understand even remotely what the figures in front of him in what he calls the larger book.
Well,
Isn't
help
that
me, help me.
the larger book?
I don't know everything, help me.
He doesn't quite understand the figures in the larger book.
Help
The
me.
figures,
The
the
non-profit
figures,
organizations,
the figures.
900,000. Help us all.
Mr.
help
Chairman,
us.
Honourable member, you spoke in silence.
Thank you.
Allow the Honourable AG to answer.
I want that rule to apply at all times. I'm obliged to you, sir.
The larger book does not attempt to give the answers that perhaps he was hoping to find there. The larger book talks about actual expenditure in the year 2023-24. Then it gives the approved estimates for the year 2024-25. Then it gives the revised estimates. Then it gives the budget allocation for 25-26. None of these figures could even say what the actual expenditure for the financial year would be, because at this point, we still have another 6 weeks to go. So I don't know what he's expecting to see here, but unfortunately it will not be here because that is just not how the larger book works. Now, as for tint, I'm happy that he wants
My question
tint.
this morning related to 23-24. I beg your pardon, sir.
I'm happy that the honourable member wants to talk about tint. He operates on the assumption that we are visiting upon the public of Barbados some horrendous regulation that will serve to put Barbadians under the boot of the government or under a state of oppression. There's hardly a country in the world, let me repeat, there's hardly a country in the world that does not have taint legislation. Even Barbados has taint legislation. People are being charged in Barbados all like no in relation to taint. In relation to whether the taint is dark, whether you could see through the taint or not. The simple fact is, Mr. Chairman, when the honourable member looks at the legislation, he will see that it is expressed in very subjective terms. and deals with the question of whether a person is visible through the driver's side window, as if the car ain't got other windows. Where the person is visible. So, with due respect to the commissioner on my left, a policeman with bad eyesight might find the clearest of tint might still be sufficient to conceal your member for St. James Central. Or for Christchurch South, for that matter. It is simply too subjective, and I'm surprised your member for Christchurch South has never taken it to Parliament to have it tested. So the point is, what is important is to set a standard for tint, as opposed to whether a police officer could see you through a window. That's too subjective. Almost every country in the world has those kinds of stipulations. Now, we've abided in Barbados with it for a long time. But Mr. Chairman, tell me that you don't feel a wince of discomfort as you walk along the street and you see a car that is so blacked out, you cannot see who in it, what they're doing in it. You don't know if they have a gun, a breadfruit, or 4 big rocks. You have no idea. Police officers that we praise today have to approach vehicles in the course of investigations, and these vehicles are so blacked out that they have every reason to be afraid to approach them. Young member want to know when the taint legislation is coming. It is coming later this month, possibly next month, but it is coming. It is coming. It is an important tool in the arsenal of law enforcement, just like many others. The police asked us, whether through self-interest or whether through increasing their capacity to properly govern this country in terms of law enforcement, they've asked us for it, and we're going to give it to them. It seems reasonable to this administration. We are not breaking new ground. When your member goes into Miami and pick up a car, he can't say, man, this is too clear, you want a darker tint. Because it has to abide by the laws of the United States. So Barbados will be no different. I hope we get his support when it comes.
Thank you very much. And related, and thanks for the sobriety of the answer, Mr. Giggles. As with legislation that deals with drunken driving, will this legislation or the enforcement of this legislation employ machines or equipment that deal with gradations of tint? In other words, will the police officers be equipped with equipment that grades the darkness of the lightness of tint? Since it is coming sometime this month or next month, one expects that all these matters would be resolved. That is my simple question. Will the police officers be equipped with machines that grade the lightness of the dark or the darkness of tint?
Before you respond, Honourable Attorney General, let me read the standing orders here. Standing order 37. 1, it shall be out of order to anticipate an order of the day by a discussion on a motion or amendment dealing with the subject matter of an order of the day prior to the consideration of that order. So I would consider this. This is already on the order paper and down for discussion.
That is to overrule the question, sir? Except that what I am asking,
Yes, it is.
I am not asking as to the letter of the promised law. I am asking as to the enforcement of the promised law. If my interpretation is correct, that standing order precludes debate as to the letter of the law. I'm not asking about the letter of the law. I'm not asking about the letter of the proposed legislation. I am asking as to the enforcement. How is it proposed to enforce the legislation? That is my question, and I seek your honor's ruling on it. Thank you very much.
You're asking for discussion on a matter, so that's what we are. That's what you're actually.
As the enforcement
doing. You can't.
Your honor would have heard. Your honor would have heard. Your honor would have heard the learned Honorable Attorney General give a rather extensive and detailed exposition as to tint, as to its subjectivity, and a proposed amendment as to objectivity. I'm not interested in the issue of subjectivity as to the existing legislation, nor the objectivity as to the proposed legislation. I'm asking a completely different question. I am moving beyond the legislation existing and proposed, and I am raising questions as to enforcement, as to what, not what this Parliament will expect to hear, because that is beyond us. We can't predict what this Parliament will hear when it comes. I am asking on behalf of the public, what can they expect in relation to the enforcement or the management of this matter? They're two completely different issues. The content of the legislation is one issue. The management of the matter is an entirely different issue. And I think the public is entitled to hear how this matter will be enforced. That's the distinction. Please, Your Honor can rule on it. And whatever ruling Your Honor makes, I will abide by that.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I will abide by it. Whatever ruling you make, sir, I abide by it. Thank you very much.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, can the chair speak?
Yes, please.
You will have the same opportunity to ask the very same questions that you are asking now when the legislation comes, correct? That is what is happening. You will have the same opportunity to ask those questions when the legislation comes.
Except that the process and the procedure is different. You don't ask questions during the course of legislation with a guaranteed answer. This exercise here is completely different.
Of the Opposition.
I'm entitled to ask questions now and receive answers. When legislation is being debated, I'm not entitled to receive answers. It's a debate. We make speeches. This is an exercise dealing with questions and answers. And I hope that I'm entitled to ask a question and receive an answer in a procedure that is fundamentally different from a parliamentary debate on legislation which is brought before the Parliament. And I go back to the original scope of my question, that it deals with the enforcement of a matter of public interest as opposed to the content of legislation which the learned Attorney General says will come here either this month or next month. But again, I will accept the ruling of the chair. I'm obliged to you, sir.
And Honorable Leader of the Opposition, I have ruled on the matter.
And your ruling
stands. And my ruling stands. You will have the same opportunity to ask whatever questions you so desire to ask.
I'm obliged to you, sir. I'm obliged to you, sir. Now, the third follow-up question is this. whether the scheme, I'm not referring to legislation, again, I'm not referring to legislation, whether the scheme for this widespread tinting of vehicles will require business persons to import and possess equipment for the grading of tint, or whether, well, I'll leave it there. Whether it requires business persons who apply tint to import and possess equipment before they apply that tint. In other words, will there be policing of business persons who will apply that tint? I'm obliged to you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm mindful of your ruling, and I don't propose to in any way aid and abet the breach of the standing orders by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I will say, inasmuch as he's interested in how the funds of the Barbados Police Service was spent in the last financial year.
Yes.
In the last financial year, the Barbados Police Service used some of its expenditure in purchasing 50 tint meters.
Thank you.
Those 50 tint meters are the best that money can buy, because we don't intend to take any chance with this matter. The lead up to the discussions on tint as the establishment of standards for tint as a measure as part of the law enforcement arsenal saw us meeting with all of the interest groups, and that included individuals who we met with virtually all of the business people who are engaged in the application of tint. And to a man, they all said, please let us know what tint meters you are going to buy so that I don't have one meter and you have the next. So it is expected that individuals who are engaged in the application of tint will be buying meters. That's what they said to us. Because when an individual who put tint on his car 8 years ago, nobody don't remember what tint that was. He don't remember. The body who put it on don't remember. So he drives up to the tint workshop, and the person will be able to say, let me measure it, you're fine. Let me measure it, you're not fine. They have expressed an interest in having the machines. The machines are widely available. They're not expensive. Many have already purchased the tint meters. The Ministry of Public Works, I believe, may already have purchased theirs, so that the entire system is ready for this. There will be no disruption to the business community. As I said, we met with them, and they were anxious to make sure that everybody was using the same meters, because they didn't want to have one body using a meter that might be any different. And the meters are not expensive, and I'm sure they've already bought, but the police already have their 50 meters in hand, and the training has already been completed.
Thank you very much. And in a mature discussion, you will have answers that are consistent with sobriety, and I really am obliged to you. And this is the third one. I asked 3 questions in all, 2 were follow-up, and permit me to ask the third question, sir.
No, Honourable.
The third one, I asked 3 in all. The first one was... Permit me, sir. This is a democratic process.
Definitely it is.
And I hope you
and
will
it's a
honor
process
that
of order
process.
as well.
Beg your pardon, sir?
It's a process of order as
yes,
well.
Yes, and I'm insisting that I asked 2 follow-up questions, and I was told that I have 3.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, you cannot insist with the chair. You're trying to overrule the chair.
No, I'm not trying to overrule you. I'm reminding the chair as to what transpired over the last 10 minutes. That I asked 1 question and then 2 by way of follow-up, and I was given the assurance that I have 3 follow-up questions. and we began by agreeing that your dispensation will be fair, and I consider that it has been fair for the whole day, and I'm asking you to continue, let us continue along that path of fairness. And if you do so, my third follow-up question then will be,
Honourable member, you would be invited to come back. Thank you.
come back with the same question that I intend to ask now? It is a follow-up question. It is a follow-up question to what
You will
the
have
Attorney
another
General
chance,
said.
Honourable member, Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Let me then, without disrespecting your ruling, say to you that the question would have been that
Honourable Leader
whether
of the
Attorney General.
Opposition, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, your time has expired. The chair has ruled.
Time or number of questions, sir?
Honourable member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of sobriety, I just want to take the conversation to sub-program 0240. And this program is dealing specifically with forensic services. I know it may not be what we would call in the whole legal conversation the sexy subject, but for me, science and forensics and the law, I think that they are equally important. And I just want to go into the question. And the question is that I recognize that since last estimates, you would have put at least $800,000+ additional for the purchase of equipment to this forensic unit. I want you to elaborate on the importance of having science and technology informing what we do in terms of having our justice system being run in a fair way, because the conversation is always that justice must seem to be served. And I'm happy to know that we have the forensic, the scientific approach, where fingerprints, DNA, and those types of things. I don't know if you do anthropology here, but those types of scientific and technological advancements are used so we can get to what they call the nitty-gritty of crime as it relates to evidence. I just want you to elaborate on the what the forensic science unit and what they do in terms of the service they provide, and how important it is in terms of our ability to ensure that justice is duly served in this country. Thanks.
I remember I'm going to ask the assistance of the director of the Forensic Sciences Laboratory in the response to your question, but I reserve the right to supplement what she says. Over to the director.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and honorable members in the House. Just to elaborate, the Forensic Sciences Center is an integral arm of the judicial system, and we provide the impartial scientific support for the adjudication of all cases, especially for those cases that are within the realm of criminal cases. Now, the equipment is needed because in many instances, the equipment increases our visual acuity, meaning that we get to be able to see things that you cannot see with the naked eye. The major principle and tenet of forensics is Locard's exchange principle, which is every contact leaves a trace. So if you go somewhere and you leave, we'll find part of you wherever you went, okay? Now, the amount of money that has been increased is primarily to purchase the DNA equipment that I spoke of this morning, which is the DNA rapid ID system that is going to allow us to achieve profiles of single source samples within at least 90 minutes. This in itself is going to improve the service that we can give to the Barbados Police Service, because we will now be able to assist them in getting profiles quickly and be able to see maybe where they have hits and matches between different cases that they would not necessarily be investigating on a similar level. In addition to that, the other sets of money is to acquire a gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer with FID, and that is to be able to identify the narcotics. And Minister Abrams would be aware of the early warning system that we have been working very closely with NCSA and the other early warning system partners, where we were able last year to identify the new designer substitute for cannabinoids and be able to alert the general public as to what dangers are out there, because there is a public health situation. So the monies are necessary because the monies allow us to get the equipment that can do the work that we need to do. As I said before, our equipment is at end of life, and technology has changed so drastically within the past 10 years that we need to be able to work on a different platform. And again, our scope of services supports the judicial system, the coroner's office, the magistrates' courts, the Supreme Courts, to provide that impartial evidence, especially as it relates to drug cases where we determine whether there's prima facie evidence of the presence or absence of the narcotics.
Thank you. My second question, I don't think it's a secret that my constituency was faced over the last year or so with a measure of gun-related crime. I have been at the center of discussions with both the family of the victims and the family of the perpetrators as well. I just want to know what support services are provided for both the family of the victims, because we recognize, of course, the emotional and social stress they're under, and unfortunately as well, those perpetrators, because their families sometimes face the wrath of an unforgiving community. So equally, I think that there would need the support services, whether psychological or otherwise, social, etc. What services your department provide for these persons when their families are exposed to unfortunate incidents of crime and violence?
Thank you, Honourable Member. You know what you are discussing really requires a mindset that is very different to the one espoused by the Leader of the Opposition. His stance is that our only focus should be on lick and lock up. But we've come a long way since those times. That's why we could say that lick and lock up is done with. Pardon the poor use of the English language. Globally, there is a common understanding that in any criminal justice system, the victims have to receive equal treatment from the state, equal in measure to what the accused person receives. The state spends an awful lot of money in investigating crime, spends a lot of money in prosecuting crime, spends a lot of money in feeding the criminal, sometimes for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Traditionally, Barbados has not in any measure focused on the victims of crime. In the instances of rapes and sexual assault, the police service did have an individual who would do counseling. In the case of many violent crimes, the police service has in its budget an amount of money to engage counseling services from one or two individuals or entities that provide counseling services. But beyond the counseling services, nothing. In England, for many years, there has been something called the Criminal Compensation Board. And the Criminal Compensation Board served the purpose of, firstly, assessing injury to a victim, generally physical injury, and secondly, paying to that victim a measure of damages, almost as if the individual who caused the injury was being sued in court. But we don't have a criminal compensation board. In fact, I remember this discussion coming up when I was AG under an earlier dispensation of this government, and we simply did not have the resources to do it. The Needham's Point Declaration of October 2023 recognizes that we need to pay more attention to the victim. And I would want to say, and I'm happy to make it a document of the House, that item 27 of the Needham's Point Declaration, it is recommended, and I quote with your permission, sir, that consideration be given to the establishment, where none exists, of a criminal injuries compensation fund for the benefit of victims, survivors of crimes, particularly for those whose cases, because of abysmally low detection rates, are not pursued in the criminal justice system. A significant contribution to the CICF should come from the proceeds of crime, whether through criminal or civil asset forfeiture. And in this regard, the notion then of compensating the victim is now being thrust into the forefront of how our criminal justice system is expected to deal with impact on the victim. Currently, my ministry has commenced a victim impact assessment. It is being done by criminologists in the Office of the Attorney General, and this victim assessment will try to find out and identify really who the victims of homicides are, who are the dependents of the victims of homicides, but also who are the dependents of the accused persons who might be incarcerated. Because in the same way that the victim has independence, the incarcerated person might have children who are now robbed of that kind of support. So the first steps in trying to determine how we address the issues of treating the victim, dealing with the victim, if possible making state allocations to the victims, we have to do this study. I'm able to say, and I believe that the minister responsible for welfare and elder affairs will be able to confirm that his ministry had been given the responsibility of looking to see how we can provide some financial assistance to the families of individuals who have suffered a loss as a result of a homicide. And I think that program has started. I'm unable to say what the measure of that compensation or support is, but I say that this is new. This represents a completely different mindset to how the criminal justice system has been working in the past. It was almost as if as long as the individual who caused the wrong receives their just deserts in the legal system, then we have no more to do with you. But that is clearly a short-sighted approach, because when a family loses its breadwinner, when it loses its mainstay, its pillar of support, then that is a family that becomes vulnerable, and that vulnerability may then cause them to get involved in the very thing we are trying to keep them out of. There are instances, Mr. Chairman, when the sons of young men, or perhaps I should just say the sons of men, who have been murdered, have sworn vengeance on the individual who, in their view, committed the homicide. Now that is a heavy burden for a young boy to carry. That at 10 or 11, as far as he's concerned, so-and-so killed my father, then I get big, I going and kill he back, I going and kill he too. That's a heavy burden for a child to carry. And therefore, the state has an obligation to intervene in instances, whether by supporting the family, by supporting that individual, not just through counseling, but sometimes financial support, so as to ensure that that young man or woman does not follow that path that sometimes they swear to follow. I hope that that assists you in the general question. I can't tell you that there's any active engagement in terms of victim assistance in your constituency as you've asked, but I'm happy to look into it for you.
Thank you, Adrian. I know that with my own personal experience, there were a number of, and I want to thank the members of the the Barbados Police Service, for their efforts in my community, because I recognize that they reached out to a lot of NGOs who came on board as well, and other ministries, because it's all about partnership. I mean, we can't do it alone. My last question is one that I recognize, of course, that your ministry would have done a lot of work to ensure that the physical structures for both judiciary and the police service in terms of the stations, that there were massive upgrades since 2018. I want to congratulate you for that, because those who are involved in this fight must be in a comfortable environment. And that is a given across the board. We have new emerging crimes with the new digital and technological sphere that we operate in. These new crimes have affected Barbados in a different way, total different way. With the emergence of these crimes, and you can speak about them in terms of what we are seeing across the board, because they are affecting Barbadians. What is your ministry doing in order to combat these new vagaries, recognizing, of course, that technology, and whether digital or other ways, is now being used in the whole thrust of crime? What is your ministry doing in terms of providing equipment, et cetera, to ensure that Barbadians are safe as it relates to these types of crimes?
I'm going to ask the Commissioner to assist in the answer.
Thank you. In terms of the whole technology rollout in addressing crime situations in Barbados, I must say that over time, we have received, that is the Barbados Police Service, have received tremendous financial input from the government in terms of sourcing equipment technology-wise to bring the police service into the 21st century. And we are fully engaged in that installation and placing the technology in strategic locations whereby it can benefit the police service and, by extension, members of the public. So we have been reaping tremendous successes when it comes to operationalizing various facets of technology in terms of fighting crimes. And not only that, we have tremendous buy-ins from members of the public, business community, and a number of residents throughout the country. So whether it is in terms of seeing and knowing exactly what is happening in various communities and locations, we are engaging in that tremendously, and we continue to identify those points that we, as persons mentioned before, not only hotspots, but also those areas whereby when we go through various districts and do our analysis of locations, situations, and things like that. We mentioned geomapping, and that is something also that is working for us. So whether it is dealing with eyes in the sky, it's no secret that we have a number of drones. Drone technology is used universally throughout the world in terms of combating aspects of crime. So we in the Barbados Police Service, we are not suffering in terms of technology to fight the issues of crime. Now, technology will not work on its own, and that is why we are engaging members of the public who are willingly working with us, whether it is coming boldly and saying, well, I am X or Y, and I'm going to work with you and assist you, but also those who will use various means to communicate with us, whereby we would know how to employ technologies. I must congratulate members, especially in the business community, who also assist us in acquiring equipment so willingly, so we can utilize in terms of protecting our various communities. So yes, for us, community, for looking after the communities, citizens, and the entire country, we cannot, in this modern times, do without the latest aspects of technology, and members of the organization, we are using it. And once we continue to get that financial support from the government side of it, that is a road that we will continue to pursue, because we know at the end of the day, we can achieve our objectives as laid out in our policing plan going forward to make the country safe and sound for each and every member of the public. So yes, we will look and see the latest state-of-the-art technology and place them in strategic locations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to comment lastly by saying that AG, and I want to congratulate you because I recognize in your estimate that you have put some money for a female dorm at the training center, and I want to say to you that since 2018, and to congratulate you for having and putting an equal trust and equitable trust in terms of advancing women within the police force so that they have that equitable and tangible stake, and I want to congratulate you for that.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. In addition to the thrust in relation to equality among male and female recruits, we've also been encouraged to increase the age of applicants. Because I think the current age is 35, and we've received several representations. That age was raised to 35, I believe, about 4 or 5 years ago. We've been asked to consider increasing the recruitment age, especially since there are levels of specialization that do not require an officer to be physically fit. So take, for example, a IT person. An IT person who may, can I say, might work at a commercial bank or something, or work for an IT company, but who is 45, may well be willing to come and work in the Barbados Police Service. But we could not recruit that person, even though it is their skill that they need and not their physical rigor. We can't recruit that person to join the ranks of the police service because they are over the age. Somebody who might be skilled in forensic accounting. So there are a number of policing skills that we require today, more now than ever, that we may not be able to bring on board as police officers simply because of the age requirements. So that the question of equality on all sides has to be relooked.
Thank you. E.G. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker. Beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. He thinks the ayes have it.
Someone has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 5 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 5 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 5 p.m.